Welcome to the first solo episode of Life in Focus with Sutita. This first episode is all about how do I start with healing? And before we actually dive in, I want to give a backstory about how I got to where I am right now. June 23rd of this year, I picked up my iPhone and I started sharing my healing and growth journey. And fast forward to now, we're in the beginning of October, and I now have amassed nearly 50,000 followers on TikTok. I've got over 6 million views, 30 people who have applied to work with me one-on-one for my 4-week deep dive program. And it became more and more aware to me that healing and growth is not easy. And there are so many people who are going down this path. Some are at the very beginning of their journey. Some are in the messy middle of their journey. But the conversations and the people that have reached out to me, it's only made it so clear that there's a space for this. And that day on June 23rd, when I decided to just publish my first TikTok around healing and growth, has now catapulted me into an area where I want to continue sharing my journey, because it is definitely not a milestone and there is no finish line here for me at all. And so my healing journey began back in 2020 when I lost my grandfather. He was the father that I never had. I had a very close relationship with him. He was the guy that I went to when it came down to making big life decisions, figuring out what I wanted to do with my career. I mean, I got him ordained so he could marry me and my husband. And he just played such a profound role for me in terms of just shaping me into the person that I am today. He was incredibly kind, incredibly patient, deeply intellectual, and losing him, every time I talk about him, I still get pretty choked up because that's just the way grief works. When I lost him, death was completely incomprehensible to me. I just couldn't believe that I was never going to see him again. And so, feeling so hopeless and helpless, I decided to get into grief therapy. And when I got into grief therapy, it turned and transformed into childhood therapy and began to scratch the surface of that. And so I started learning more about what exactly happened to me. Why do I overgive? Where does the high achiever in me come from? And much of that came down to the fact that it was conditioning as a child, and it's just been so ingrained in my nervous system. So I've just felt like growing up and going into adulthood, everything I did just felt like it was never enough. And relational reciprocity just simply didn't exist in my vocabulary, let alone my life, for decades. I would just overgive until the point of depletion, until resentment met me, and complete burnout. And at the essence of it, I was essentially abandoning myself to get conditional validation and approval. So I was in therapy for a couple of years, and then at that point, I decided to stop. And I did what Gabor Mate recommends. So if you guys don't follow any of his stuff, I would hugely recommend you all check out some of his books and podcasts that he's been featured on. He just gives a deeper layer of understanding of why we operate the way that we do, why or what essentially shaped us, and understanding that what shaped us doesn't need to define us. And so check out his stuff. But I took Gabor Mate's advice in terms of going a layer deeper, multiple layers deeper, and following my compassionate curiosity. And so that helped me understand what happened to me as a kid. Why do I view things the way that I do? Why is my immediate reaction to specific interactions the way that they are? I mean, how am I programmed the way that I am? And so, it took me all the way back to being a kid. I just remember, for years, I was the strong one. I was parentified. I always felt like my parents, especially my mom, really parentified me to the extent that if her and my dad were in a disagreement or fighting, which was often, I would be in the position where I would take on so much of hers, but even my father's too, because if I was with him, he would be venting about my mom. And so they would offload their emotional pain to me. And it's not just me, they did it to my siblings as well. But I think for me, since I was at home the longest, I endured it the longest too. And so as a kid, what that taught me was I need to be easy. I'm the one who can make things better for my mom, for my dad. I need to be incredibly strong and capable so that I don't have to bother them with any of the things that I need. So essentially, my emotional needs were not attuned to. And that then caused me to attach myself to a lot of external markers. And these external markers came with being high achieving, the peacemaker, the funny one, the strong one, the caretaker. I just wanted to be the most reliable person, and I wanted to just give as much as I possibly could. And that giving taught me that no matter how much I gave, it just felt like it was never enough. And so what I would essentially think in my head as a kid is, then I just need to keep giving. I need to give more. And now as I got into adulthood, it started to proliferate in the relationships that I was in, as well as friendships, especially friendships, working relationships, everything. I wanted to be the best friend. I wanted to be the best girlfriend. I wanted to be, the best at anything that I knew was going to give me some sort of validation. And while I was so busy giving and doing all of this stuff and over functioning, I was essentially abandoning myself, which gets me to my whole point of this episode. How do you start with healing? I would have to say honesty has to come first. And within that honesty, you have to steer away from labels because your language is going to be especially important. So with my one-on-one clients who work with me on a 4-week basis where we dive super deep into their healing and growth journey, I always say, do not label yourself as broken. You're not a project that needs to be repaired, and you don't need to be fixed either. And shift away from blame, because when you blame, you give away your power. You're putting it onto external things and people and environments. And instead of taking ownership for your own healing, you're like waiting for somebody to come back and apologize, or somebody to patch you up or save you or fix you. But if you start with honesty, it is just getting real with your current situation, how you're consistently feeling, your emotional, your mental state, and the unhealthy patterns that you've been conditioned to believe that are normal, but then having to work on unlearning all of them. And so I'll say your ability to be honest with yourself is going to reflect how much of your healing is going to evolve. You have to tell yourself the truth about what hurt you, what's still with you that causes pain, what you're carrying and what you're pretending that doesn't bother you, but deep down it does. And that is essentially the doorway. And something that I say often is that healing is like building muscle. There is no finish line. There is no medal waiting for you. You have to keep putting in the reps to grow and evolve. And this is what makes it such a big hurdle for us as humans, is because we are so used to, if I do X, Y, and Z, my outcome is this. And in healing, there isn't any of that. It's essentially invisible to the eye. That's what emotional conditioning is. You can physically condition your body, and you look in the mirror and you can see the difference. You can see you've gained muscle, or you've gotten thinner or more toned, whatever it is. But when you are working on healing and truly growing as an individual, you cannot look in the mirror and see the emotional gains. But a key thing that I've noticed in myself and that I work with clients on is that you will start to notice your emotional conditioning and it actually working when you stop responding to things the way that you normally do. So in times of conflict, or if you feel like you're not being heard or misunderstood, instead of lashing out or shutting down, you actually pause and you give yourself an opportunity to do things differently. And as you dive deeper into your healing journey, you'll continue to evolve because your triggers won't just disappear, but the more honest that you are with yourself, you'll realize that your trauma wasn't just this big T trauma. It's 1,000 small ones. And I think of it as like paper cuts. you didn't notice the first, second, third, fourth, or fifth one until your whole entire hand started to sting. Whether it was just being the strong one, only receiving love when you performed, only being praised when you were useful, and truly just feeling unseen because you had to hide the most authentic parts of yourself to ensure that the caregivers in your life didn't have to deal with your emotional needs. And so you don't have to decode your entire past either. Just start with what still hurts. And at what age do I remember vividly things happening? And now as an adult, I know that they weren't supposed to happen, or they felt off, or they felt wrong. And then asking yourself, how do you remember surviving those moments? And how are you still stuck in survival mode as an adult? Examples of this could be, I always braced whenever my caregiver walked into the room. I was not to be caught sitting around, laying around. I had to be productive. I had to be cleaning. I had to be doing something. Or I learned early that I shouldn't need so much, but I need to give as much as I possibly can to keep other people comfortable. And I should sacrifice the things that I would need, the things that I want, because other people's desires and their needs are so much more important than mine. And all of these things aren't just living memories of your childhood, right? These are things that are now ingrained into your nervous system. It's the concept where your body is going to keep score. Your body will always remember, even if your mind has forgotten. That is something that you can use as data to start getting into the parts that really hurt and cracking them open. That's what healing is. You have to crack these parts open, and then growth is when you can figure out what you do with those parts. And I think this is a big misconception, is that I touched on this earlier, is healing, there is no finish line. And so you're not going to just be healed from a specific trigger and never be triggered ever again and just walk through life completely unbothered. That is unrealistic, and you should get rid of that expectation right away. You will still get triggered. Things will still make you mad. Welcome all of those emotions. But the difference now is, as you evolve through your healing and growth, you're not going to let those emotions or initial reactions run your life anymore. That was when you were in survival mode. That is your inner child speaking to you, and you have to reparent that inner child. It could be on a daily basis, and you don't even notice, because it is one of the toughest things you have to face. But the relationship that you start to build with your inner child is going to be so important for your evolution. And one of the key ways to doing this is to separate where you are today, your identity today, from your inner child, from your emotions. I love telling this story, and I have to tell it because I think it'll put things into perspective for all of the listeners out there. There was a period in time last year where my daughter was dealing with a lot of anxiety. There were just certain friendship dynamics at school, and it really stressed her out. She'd come home and tell me and my husband about it, and we would just be providing solutions left and right, instead of validating her and really being there with her and listening and letting her be seen, right? Because the protective mama bear in me was, I will provide solutions, and this is how, try this or try that. But she needed to hear me just say that I'm here for you. And wow, that sounds really hard. What do you think you want to do about that? And empowering her to feel like she can make the decision. She might not have the agency to do it all on her own, but instead of me providing the solutions, I can sit with her and be present with her. And so, her anxiety started to build up, and she would complain about a tight throat, tight chest, her stomach hurting, feeling dizzy. She's asthmatic. So my husband and I were really worried. We thought, oh my gosh, this has to be a bigger health issue. We take her in to see her pediatrician. The pediatrician says, this is a classic case scenario of kids who are dealing with anxiety. And so what we did was, we essentially, for just like the next week, we instilled every single night. We sat down as a family. I have a little boy too. And the four of us would just sit in a circle, and we would do breathing exercises. And then we gave her the opportunity, as well as my son, to name their feelings. What emotions visited you today? So listen to how we said that. What emotions visited you today? It's not, What are you feeling? Because we try to separate the emotion from identity as much as we could. So we let our daughter name the anxiety. The anxiety was Mr. Bugaboo. And so from that point on, along with the nightly rituals that we were doing for that week, if I would be cooking dinner and my daughter would feel her anxiety coming up, she would say, "Uh-oh, mommy, I can really feel my anxiety." I would just say to her, "Well, do you want him to join us for dinner? Would you like him to come hang out with us?" And that gave her more power to say, "You know what? I just feel like saying hi and I'm going to say bye." And so instead of saying, "You're anxious," it helped her say, "Mr. Bugaboo is visiting and I'm going to choose if I want to hang out with him or not." And so circling back to like the inner child, what I say with a lot of clients is when you look back on your childhood wounds and just these really standout moments that you can just recall, whether it's ages 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, even your teenage years, go back and meet that inner child and reparent them the right way. And it's instead of freaking out when something pisses you off, you have the ability to just pause. You use the power of the pause to just say, "Hey, I hear you and I see you. You're completely safe. This is the route that we're going to go together." And so it separates your identity from the emotions, from the inner child, and you're building a relationship with it instead of feeling like you are it. So as we close out this podcast, I think something I just want to leave all of the listeners with is that real healing is not aesthetic. It's messy. It's going to cause you to question so many things. You're going to wake up, you're going to have good and bad days. You're going to question whether or not you're doing the right thing. And you're going to want to go back to the survival mode practices because at one point, that's all you knew. That's what kept you safe and it was normal for you. Now you're unlearning all of that and you're rebuilding emotional scaffolding that you never knew you could. And there's a lot of unknowns. There is no familiarity here. And that's what makes it so challenging. That's what makes it so hard. But continue to have compassion for yourself. Give yourself all the things that you didn't get as a child. You can give that to yourself now. Because when you're taking the ownership, the accountability, responsibility to heal and to grow, you get to be in a position where you no longer have to abandon yourself.